Hello and welcome to Be the Change. This podcast series is from the Green Faith Initiative at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis. And my name is David Stout. I'm the library manager for writing, research, and digital scholarship here at CTS. And I also serve as part of our Green Faith Initiative team. Today we have Jerry Kranowitz, CEO of Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, or KIB for short. It's a wonderful local organization that works at the intersection of community and the environment. And it seeks to help people and nature thrive together. Jeremy, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us.
I'm delighted to have the chance to chat with you and share some interesting information with your audience.
Can you share a little of your story, how and why you came to become interested in improving the ecology of Indianapolis and how you came to KIB after that?
Sure. So I'm not native to Indiana. I was born and raised on the East Coast. And as a young kid, was very active in sports. And as elementary school and middle school student, thought that I could be a professional soccer player one day, but turned out that one of the issues that was stacked against me was a lack of skill. That was the biggest problem. But a secondary problem was that I was asthmatic as a child. And if it was a bad air pollution day, it was quite clear that I could not be outside to play. Later in college, I was a competitive rower. I went to school in Baltimore and we would row in the inner harbor. And in the late 80s, the harbor was so polluted that if you got splashed in the face while you were out rowing, you could get quite sick. And it really felt like a travesty to me that here was this amazing ecological gem right in the heart of the city. And the city had literally and figuratively turned its back to the water. And both of those were sports related, but launched me on this path that I've stayed on really since college of thinking about the environment around us and how we can take action to make it better. So most of my career has been in environmental nonprofit work, sometimes for clean air, sometimes for forestry, sometimes around climate change, but always with this through line of trying to make the environment better around us. So I had an opportunity to look nationally to run a large environmental community organization. This opportunity crossed my desk to take a job at KIB. I leapt at the chance and have been here. It's been about 5 years now that I've been at the helm at KIB.
Wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about KIB's mission here in Indianapolis and maybe their vision, what it is you guys can do and are working towards?
So Keep Indianapolis Beautiful is nearly 50 years old. We started in 1976 with Mayor Hutnut, who started a Clean Cities Committee. And for folks old enough to remember, he had a public service campaign called the Hutnut Hook, where he would pretend to do hook shots of litter into trash cans and encouraging Hoosiers to make sure that litter went in its proper place. That was our origin. And for all of that time, we have continued to focus on making sure that our streets and parks are free of litter and that we encourage people to stop the act of littering in the first place. The other thing that we have done a lot, particularly in recent years, is we plant thousands of trees every year. Some of those are done in conjunction with and support from the city of Indianapolis, and some are in partnership with Citizens Energy Group, which is our big water utility. And we plant those trees particularly in neighborhoods that have been underinvested over time. So many socially vulnerable neighborhoods that lack other types of public infrastructure also lack green infrastructure. And so it is important for us to restore nature in some of those neighborhoods. And the third thing that's related is that we turn vacant or abandoned lots into vibrant community green spaces, places where old and young alike can come and hang out safely, engage with nature, and have a place near them that isn't quite a full city park, but operates in the same capacity to provide access to nature for people across the city. One of the last things that I want to add is that KIB has really strong youth programming. We do programming with high school students and with college students, so at different levels of education and interest and capability. And those programs, particularly in the summer, are used to help those students maintain all of the good green infrastructure that we're putting into place. So it is important for them to understand it's not just the planting of the tree, but it is the care and maintenance of that tree going forward that will enable nature to thrive here in Indy.
I didn't realize that in addition to the proactive things that you do about planting and such, that you also programs where you try to bring awareness to prevent litter from happening in the first place, those sorts of things.
Yeah, we had a very fun campaign at the end of last year called Bin Your Butts, because one of the most littered objects in the US and probably in the world are cigarette butts. Folks don't know this, but cigarette butts are toxic. They are made primarily of plastic and they do not degrade. We had this campaign. It was actually on bus tails. So we partnered with Indigo to put advertisements on bus tails. So it was kind of a fun play, butts and tails on.
Right.
But
right.
Also, what was amazing was how those buses really go all over the city. And so that was a traveling education campaign that had a lot of impressions across the city and encouraged people to understand more about why, in particular, cigarette butts really need to be disposed of properly.
Can you share an example of a planting project that you guys have done? Any that you'd like to use as an example here in Indy that maybe some of the viewers might be able to take a look at as an example of what you guys can offer?
Sure. Anybody in the city that drives around and sees a young tree that has a white corrugated plastic tree guard around its base, those trees were planted by KIB and its volunteers. There are 50,000 of them right now across Indianapolis. Every single one of those is planted and cared for by KIB and our partners. When we do tree plantings, they are typically somewhere between 50 and 150 trees at a time. Sometimes those are in a city park that needs more trees in a particular part of the park. Often, though, the trees are being planted along the city right-of-way. So it's going right down on the strip between the sidewalk and the street, particularly in neighborhoods that do not have a healthy or adequate tree canopy. We do projects all throughout the spring and fall. We actually have a project calendar. It's kibi.org/projects, where folks can find out when the next opportunity to join us at a tree planting will be. But we also have fun. So we play around. We're going to have a tree planting tomorrow on Pie Day. And for all the volunteers that come out tomorrow, won't be sweet pies, unfortunately for me. It will be savory. We're going to give pizza pies to people that come out. But we're also going to do a planting on the eclipse and make some tie-ins there. We're going to do a May the 4th Be With You Star Wars themed tree planting on May 4th. So we have fun with the calendar as well as we do these plantings around the city.
Sounds excellent. From my own experience, I live in the Irvington area on the east side of town. And there are some projects that I know KIB has assisted with there, including our community organization at School 88. And this was several years ago, but we did tree planting. KIB also helped with construction of some raised bed gardens.
Yes.
We were in turn then able to show the school kids how to raise food. And for a lot of those folks who were from urban areas, they had never planted a garden, nor had they seen anybody raise food.
Nor is there often, surprisingly, a full understanding of where food comes from or whether it grows from a tree or out of the ground. So all of that is part of that discovery. I will just share a quick story. Before we go and plant trees in a neighborhood, typically a number of neighbors have said, hey, there aren't many trees in our neighborhood. Would you please bring some? We need to get that request from the neighbors first. And then we go out and canvass and knock on doors and distribute flyers and so forth to let folks know that we are coming and to give them the opportunity to talk to us about it and ask questions, and also give them the opportunity to opt out. They do not want a tree. That is totally fine. But there was a great story from last fall where a grandmother answered the door and we were talking to her, and her giant grandson came lumbering up behind her, and she said, well, he's not doing anything on Saturday. And so she voluntold him to come out and plant trees with us. But the young man was probably 17 or 18. He had never planted a tree before. This was the first time planting a tree. He was taught the correct way to plant a tree to ensure that it would thrive. And he planted the tree in front of his grandma's house. And like, that was his tree and for his grandmother. And there's something about the intergenerational aspect of it, and that the tree would be there to support him and his grandchildren in the future, which was just so lovely in that moment. And I love when those types of opportunities are created.
In a day where there's plenty of things to be concerned about and worry about, sometimes we forget that simply engaging in the act of making things better is its own sort of regenerative element, right? Just taking the time to plant a tree, we feel better about the fact that we planted a tree. And they can be cumulative.
Yeah, that is correct. And I truly believe, regardless of your faith, or even if you have none, this is some of the most spiritual work, some of the best and most restorative work that we can do. And to your point, it is bringing folks together that might not otherwise come together to do this work collaboratively.
At the core of the Green Faith Initiative and also the Christian Theological Seminary, creation care is a big portion of what we're trying to do. We have this great, wondrous thing, and we ought to do something to care, to work as stewards.
Well, that's right. And some of the work that we've been doing in past couple of years has been interfaith tree plantings, where we collaborate with the Center for Interfaith Cooperation, which is right nearby, and bring together leaders of different faith traditions, all of whom, every major tradition, has something to say about caring for the world around us. And so we bring these different faith leaders together who can recite from their respective sacred texts and practices. And then it doesn't matter whether you are Buddhist or Baptist, Hindu, Jew, Muslim. We all can come together and respect our respected faiths and understand how we can work together to make the world a better place.
Very well put. I have two related questions, and so I'll try to mention them at the same time. What commitments do end users need to make? And you mentioned a couple of those. And along those lines, how long do trees need sustainable care afterwards, such as fertilizer, watering, protection from those things that might want to eat the trees? And in the cases of properties that are along city streets, that is right-of-ways, what sort of permissions or permits when a property is adjacent to a street, what do property owners need to get in order to be able to plant there?
When neighbors request trees of KIB and we are able to plant trees along the right-of-way, our staff gets all of the necessary permits. We also make sure that we are not going to interfere with existing sidewalks. Some people are worried that the trees, once they get older, the roots will heave the sidewalk. So we're not interfering with sidewalks or sewers or internet lines or water lines or electric lines. We make sure that we are avoiding all of those utilities and public infrastructure. When we plant trees, we are also sizing the tree. Some trees, as you know, can be monstrous in terms of their size and girth. Well, if the place where we're planting is limited, we won't plant a tree there, because that's when you get a tree that has nowhere else to go and that starts heaving a sidewalk, for example. So we make the right tree in the right place, given the amount of size. For all of the trees that we plant, we care for them for 3 full years after we plant them. And after about 3 years, we have found that those trees have a very high probability of long-term survival. An average urban tree planted either by the city or anywhere in the country, you can expect maybe 60 to 70% of them to live 3 years after they've been planted. We know that we are over 90% survivability on the trees that we plant. And one of the key reasons, and you alluded to it, is that we water and mulch and prune those trees for that 3 years. And the watering is the key thing, because water is falling in irregular patterns. We're often getting deluges that are really heavy rains, but they're short-lived. And then we're getting long dry stretches. And the trees don't know what's going on. So if it doesn't rain a quarter of an inch in a given week, we go out and water those trees. And every single tree that we have planted gets watered 15 gallons a week. So as I said earlier, there are 50,000 trees around the city. A lot of those have been planted within the past 3 years, and all of them are getting 15 gallons a week if we're in a long dry stretch. So that's millions of gallons of water that need to be delivered tree by tree. It's really quite an elaborate logistics plan to get to all those trees to make sure that they survive.
My understanding is that one of the artifacts of global climate change is that weather patterns all over the world are changing. In the United States on the east, in general, things are becoming drier and warmer. And where things are moving drier, the conifers actually do pretty well with that. And they seem to be, over the last 50 years, moving to the west, where they can tolerate that, while deciduous trees seem to be moving north because they seem to be more sensitive to heat.
Yeah, folks who are avid gardeners may have noticed that the U.S. Department of Agriculture recently revised their planting maps. All of the climatic zones all shifted pretty significantly. And I would argue, even with that shift, it is still behind. That we are, in fact, seeing these shifts in climatic zones. So for us, when we are planting trees that we expect to be thriving for decades, we are now giving some thought to what trees will be more likely to survive. We plant over 95% of the trees we plant are native to Indiana. But whereas we might have planted trees that would thrive on the northern extent of the state not that long ago, now we are focusing more on species that would thrive in southern Indiana, because, as you said, as those zones shift, they are going to be the species that are going to be more likely to survive decades from now.
Maybe a related question: what kinds of trees are available for planting in the neighborhoods, for example? Do they have any input on that, or is that something that you recommend and there's a particular reason why you have a collection of trees? I've had some people ask me about things like our fruit trees. Is that an option that's available for a city, or nut trees, or something that they could see animals using? Although if it's native, maybe animals always make use of the trees anyway.
Well, it's a really interesting question. So we plant about 24 different species of trees. Some of them are common things that folks would have heard of, like oaks and elms and maples. And we also plant hickories and sweet gums and locusts and so forth. So there are quite a number of different species. We intentionally plant a mix of species when we do a planting, because if we were to only plant a single species of tree, the likelihood that a particular insect pest or bacteria or fungus that might infect that tree would jump from tree to tree to tree, and we would lose the whole planting. But if there's a variety of species, they typically cannot jump that easily from tree to tree. So we are quite intentional about that diversity when we are planting trees. sometimes we have neighbors who really want a particular species of tree. And sometimes we can accommodate that, or we could say, here is the palette of what we're bringing to this neighborhood. And would you like this versus that? But, if someone were to say, I really want a Japanese maple, well, if that's not in the palette and that's also not native to Indy, that won't be one of the choices available. We do rarely plant fruit-bearing trees, but I will say that fruit-bearing trees require a level of care and attention that is so much higher than a regular non-fruit-bearing tree that it is rare for us. And usually that is done when we're creating one of these pocket parks and there might be a food desert in that particular part of town. We might do it in that situation, but not as a regular action for us. But the other thing that I want to say, because you mentioned this, there are some trees, like an oak tree, that by itself can support over 200 different species of insects and birds and mammals. A single oak tree. Whereas a Bradford pear, which is anathema to us and not native to Indiana, might only support a half dozen to a dozen species. The species of insects and pollinators and birds do not like them. So you are effectively planting a desert when you plant one of these non-native trees. So it may not be fruiting in a traditional sense, but those native trees do support a really amazing variety of other species that are so important to the ecosystem as a whole.
So I'm glad that you mentioned the Bradford pear in particular. Although in the spring they're pretty, that is one that a lot of us have on our menu of the trees we would like to see go away for precisely the reasons you mentioned. And I've always thought it was an irony that tree was actually designed by the USDA as a sterile hybrid they thought would be beneficial. And of course it wasn't, because it wasn't native.
That's right. And we feel like the best Bradford pear tree that you can find is one that has been cut off at the stump. And they also split pretty easily and fall and can become hazardous quite easily. And so they really are not all they were. Maybe they are cracked up, but they're not all they imagined they might be. But yeah. The other thing that I would love to see, and this is true for CTS and for all folks that have multiple acres, is that they also start to think about converting sections of their lawn to pollinator-friendly plants. I recently attended a conference and had two of the leading thinkers on this, but one is a professor at the University of Delaware named Doug Tallamy, who has said that we have over 40 million acres of grass lawn in this country. And if we were to take just a portion of that lawn and turn it into pollinator-friendly habitat, we could collectively create one of the largest national parks in the United States. But as it is, there's more lawn, I think, than all of the continental U.S. national parks put together. And we as Americans tend to over-fertilize, over-water, and use more herbicides and pesticides at many, many multiples of what a farmer would do on his or her own land to grow food, in this desire to get a nice dark green carpet that doesn't belong there. So coming back to the idea of ecological deserts, a lawn is an ecological desert. And another quick side story is that if you just had a chickadee in your backyard and she laid 3 or 4 eggs, which is what the typical nest size is, that mother chickadee needs to find between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars to feed her young before they are ready to leave the nest. And if there is a backyard filled with green grass and pesticides and fertilizers, she's not going to find any caterpillars there. So it's the idea of trying to create these opportunities for other species to coexist and thrive with us.
I've often thought it's an irony that if we had the long term, the only thing that humans would need to do with creation or with the environment is nothing at all.
I agree with you.
That it actually is beautifully self-regulating if we haven't got it so drastically out of balance where it needs some help to get back where it needs to be to survive in the long term.
Yeah, I think you said that beautifully.
So say if our viewers wanted help and they were part of a community maybe, or there's a street that they would like planning, what do they do? What are the steps they need to do in order to contact you and make that happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if there are folks who would like to request anything of us, that our website is easy to navigate. And again, it's kibi.org. If there is a specific request around trees, the quick address is kibi.org/trees. If folks would like to volunteer themselves and do, as I mentioned earlier, what I feel is really spiritually rewarding work and come out and help plant trees with us, we love to get volunteers out to our projects, and it's kibi.org/projects. And so we typically post projects that are upcoming over the next 4 to 6 weeks at a time. So it's a rolling calendar, so you can check back often to see what opportunities might be there. And then if there are other requests about wanting to create a green space or some of those other larger projects, those can be requested from our site as well. 2 other things that I want to make a quick plug for. One is we do have this amazing summer youth program designed for high school students. It's called the Youth Tree Team. It is open to high school age students across the city. And we really encourage kids to apply for that. Applications are still open for, I believe, another couple of weeks, I think through the end of March. And we would love to see more kids apply to, these are paid internships with a lot of enrichment programs, transportation, lunch. It's really a wonderful program. I can't speak highly enough about it, and encourage more high school students to apply. And the last thing that I want to say is that we encourage both citizens and organizations to join our Adopt the Block program. This is an opportunity for everyone to do their little part. So you can adopt a block in front of your house or your house of worship, or your business or your school. And we will supply all of the bags and the litter grabbers and the gloves and all of the supplies that are needed to be able to keep that little section clean. And so if we all were able to just pick up one block as you're walking your dog, and we multiplied that by citizens across the city who care and have civic pride, imagine how amazing Indy would be for everyone. And so we have almost 1,000 people across the city that are members of our Adopt the Block program. And that's lovely, but that's only 1 in 1,000. So we need more folks to join hands with us and help do their part to clean up just a little bit.
Wonderful. We live in a state of world history where if we were to look at the magnitude of problems and think, well, what can one person do to resolve this sort of thing? Of course, the short answer would be, well, one person can't. But one person doesn't have to resolve everything. All we have to do is start by planting the one tree in front of my grandmother's property, right? Working with KIB, talking to the people down the street. And it doesn't really matter where you start, provided that you start somewhere, right? They still builds towards a better future, just one step at a time. So it is within our locus of control.
Yeah, I believe that 100%. I often retell the story of the boy with the starfish at the sea who tossing animal life back into the ocean after a big storm. And an old man says to him, you can't possibly save all of the creatures that have washed up on shore. And he said, but for the one that I do save, it makes a difference. And I think that there is something powerful about that. I'm not going to get this entirely right, but there is a Jewish saying that we are not required necessarily to finish the task, but we are also not allowed to stay away from starting the task. These large issues that are in front of us, we are morally obligated to do something. So I believe that we all can and should do our part.
That's wonderful. Jeremy, I want to thank you again for making the time to be with us today, and thank the online community for watching our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Read the Change is an educational initiative by Christian Theological Seminary's Green Faith Initiative, and we hope that you've learned something useful today. I've learned a lot of things that I wasn't aware of, and I hope that with the rest of us, you found something that inspires you to be part of that change that the world needs.